You ever have someone look you straight in the eyes and deliver words so cutting they physically hurt? Words so dismissive you can actually feel something inside you crumble? I remember that moment with perfect clarity. Standing in our kitchen, still wearing my gardening gloves, dirt smudged across my cheek, as Michael stared at me with eyes I no longer recognized and said, "Let's not pretend anymore, Rebecca. You and I both know this marriage has been dead for years. I've just been going through the motions." But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst came later, when I discovered that everyone else seemed to know about his relationship with Vanessa before I did. His colleagues, our neighbors, even some parents from Madison's school. I overheard Diane Thompson at the farmer's market telling her sister she still has no idea. He takes Vanessa to Giovanni's every Thursday while Rebecca thinks he's at his business dinners. They were standing barely 10 feet away, examining heirloom tomatoes, speaking as if I were invisible instead of right there selecting peaches at the next stand. And you know what I did when I heard them? Nothing. I just stood there, peach in hand, frozen in place. Not because their words didn't pierce me like knives. They did. But because in that moment, I couldn't believe that my husband of 17 years, the father of my child, the man who had promised forever in front of everyone we loved, had made me the subject of neighborhood gossip. That I was the last to know about my own marriage. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That devastating moment at the farmer's market happened 14 months ago. I went from being Mrs. Rebecca Winters to poor Rebecca almost overnight. From the woman who chaired the library fundraiser and organized the neighborhood block party, to someone who received awkward smiles and hurried hellos at the grocery store. People who had eaten countless meals at my dining table suddenly couldn't maintain eye contact for more than 5 seconds. The only time I seemed to exist in Michael's world anymore was during the brief exchanges about Madison, and even then, he would text rather than call, keep his eyes on his phone during pickups and drop-offs, maintain physical distance as if my situation might be contagious. He moved on quickly. Too quickly. Within 4 months, Vanessa had moved into the modern downtown condo he'd apparently purchased while we were still living together. Within 7 months, they were engaged. Vanessa, 15 years younger than me, the marketing director at his firm with carefully highlighted hair, a CrossFit membership, and a diamond ring that made mine look like something from a cereal box. By the 10-month mark, they were planning an elaborate wedding at the Gardens, the most expensive venue in Silver Lake, and Madison, our Madison, was invited to be a flower girl alongside Vanessa's niece. But I'm getting ahead of myself. You need to understand who I am before you can understand what happened next. My name is Rebecca Winters. I'm a part-time art teacher at Westridge Elementary, a mother, a gardener, a woman who's been told more times than I can count that I'm too traditional, too accommodating, too focused on making a beautiful home instead of building an impressive career. And for longer than I care to admit, I believed that was why Michael left. That I wasn't ambitious enough, exciting enough, the kind of wife a rising corporate lawyer could showcase at firm parties. When Michael and I met, I was 23, fresh out of art school, teaching community classes while trying to build a portfolio. He was 28, already moving up at Harper & Reed, confident in a way that made my artistic uncertainty feel like charming modesty rather than the deep insecurity it actually was. We met at a charity auction where one of my smaller paintings was being sold. He outbid everyone else, then asked me to coffee to discuss my artistic influences. I was flattered, intrigued. I thought his interest in art was genuine. I didn't realize until years later that Michael collected things, artwork, cars, eventually wives, as evidence of his success rather than out of genuine passion. Still, our early years had moments of real happiness. We married after 2 years of dating, bought a fixer-upper in a neighborhood with potential, spent weekends choosing paint colors and refinishing hardwood floors. Madison arrived 3 years into our marriage, perfect and pink and entirely miraculous. Those sweet early days of parenthood, Michael walking a colicky baby at 3 a.m., me nursing in the rocking chair he'd surprised me with. Both of us exhausted but amazed by this tiny human we'd created. Those moments weren't fake. I refused to believe they were. As Madison grew, so did Michael's law firm. He made partner by 35, started handling bigger clients, attending conferences in cities with better restaurants than ours. Our home life developed a rhythm. I managed most of Madison's day-to-day care, kept our increasingly beautiful home running smoothly, taught my art classes, and occasionally sold a painting at a local gallery. Michael worked long hours but made it to Madison's dance recitals and made a show of attending my small art openings, though he usually spent them networking rather than looking at artwork. It wasn't perfect, but it was ours. Or so I thought. Things began changing after Michael turned 40. Subtle shifts at first. A new wardrobe that cost more than our first car. A sudden interest in wines I couldn't pronounce. Weekend golf games with clients that stretched into late dinners. Then came the business trips that multiplied, the texts he would step outside to answer, the late nights that smelled of unfamiliar perfume. I tried talking to him about the distance growing between us. His response was always the same. "You're being insecure. This is what success looks like. I'm doing all this for us." I suggested counseling once. He laughed as if I'd proposed we join the circus. "We don't need therapy, Beck. We need you to understand that my career is demanding right now." So I tried to understand. I planned date. Nights he canceled at the last minute. I bought lingerie that remained unworn. I took a cooking class to prepare more sophisticated meals he was rarely home to eat. I told myself it was just a phase, just temporary growing pains as we adjusted to his new position. Instead, one Saturday morning as I was gardening, something that had become my solace, my small refuge, Michael came outside and said we needed to talk. I followed him into the kitchen, still wearing my wide-brimmed hat and gloves. I thought, maybe he wanted to discuss the landscaping budget or Madison's summer camp options. Instead, he delivered those cutting words with cold efficiency. "Let's not pretend anymore, Rebecca. You and I both know this marriage has been dead for years. I've just been going through the motions." I stood there, soil crumbling from my gloves onto the white tile floor I'd installed myself, and felt my world collapse. Not because I hadn't sensed something was wrong, I had, but because in that moment, I realized our entire relationship had been rewritten without my input. All those years, all those memories I'd treasured, reduced to going through the motions. "Is there someone else?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. Michael didn't even bother with denial. "Vanessa and I have been seeing each other for about 8 months. It's serious. She understands my ambitions, shares my goals. We make sense together." Just like that, 17 years of marriage dismissed as a mismatch, a wrong turn finally being corrected. Michael moved out that evening, taking only essential clothing and his personal items, promising to arrange for the rest later. I remember standing in our bedroom after he left, looking at the half-empty closet, the single toothbrush in the holder, the indentation on his side of the mattress slowly rising back to its original shape, and thinking, this can't be real. This can't be happening to me. But it was. Madison was 12 when her father left. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Old enough to understand what was happening. Young enough to still think parents are supposed to be superheroes who don't destroy each other. I tried to shield her from the ugliness, to never criticize Michael in front of her, to facilitate their relationship despite my own pain. But children see more than we want them to. They hear the whispers, notice the sideways glances, feel the tension when classmates suddenly stop talking as they approach. After Michael left, I moved through life, mechanically for weeks. I taught my classes, maintained our now too large house, showed up for Madison's events with carefully applied makeup that hid the evidence of sleepless nights. I smiled at neighbors who suddenly found my presence awkward, made small talk with parents who I knew had been discussing my failed marriage at soccer practices. But inside, I was shattered. The hardest part wasn't losing Michael. As the initial shock faded, I realized our marriage had been in trouble for longer than I wanted to admit. The hardest part was the humiliation. The knowledge that I had been the only one not in on the secret. That while I was trying to save our marriage, others had been watching its destruction as if it were a TV drama played out in real time at business dinners and charity events. Even harder was the process of examining every memory, every anniversary, every family vacation, and wondering, was it real? Was he already mentally gone? When exactly did I become an obligation rather than a choice? The photos still hanging on our walls became artifacts from a reality I now questioned. Had we ever been as happy as we looked in those smiling images? Or had I just been too naive, too willing to see what I wanted to see? The grief came in waves. Some days I could function, normally even feel occasional moments of relief or possibility. Other days, simple tasks like shopping for groceries became overwhelming as I adjusted recipes for 2 instead of 3, passed Michael's favorite cookies without reaching for them, realized I no longer needed to stock his preferred brand of coffee. Madison took it hard in her own quiet way. She didn't act out or scream or slam doors. Instead, she withdrew, spent more time in her room, stopped sharing details about school or friends. When she learned about Vanessa, which happened far too quickly thanks to social media and middle school gossip, she became even more reserved. "They looked really happy at Riverside Cafe," she said one evening, eyes fixed on her dinner plate. "Dad and his friend. A bunch of kids from school saw them." I swallowed hard before responding. "Your dad is allowed to have happiness, sweetie. This situation is complicated, but he still loves you very much." The words tasted like ash in my mouth, but I said them anyway. Because that's what good mothers do, right? They sacrifice their own feelings to protect their children's relationships with both parents. They don't burden 12-year-olds with adult pain. 2 months after Michael left, I ran into Janet Collins at the supermarket. We'd been friendly. For years. Our daughters had taken ballet together since kindergarten, but she'd been avoiding me since the separation. This time, trapped in the produce section, she couldn't escape. "Rebecca," she said, her voice pitched too high. "How are you holding up?" Her eyes held a mixture of curiosity and discomfort that I'd become familiar with. "We're managing," I said, selecting an avocado with careful attention, as if its ripeness were the most important thing in my world. "Madison's doing well, all things considered." Janet nodded too vigorously. "That's good. That's really good." A pause followed, awkward and heavy. Then she blurted, "I feel terrible that I knew before you did. About Michael and that woman. We saw them at Antonio's back in February, and I didn't know what to say." The avocado in my hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy. February. 6 months before he told me. 6 months of smiling at me across our dining table, sleeping beside me, discussing Madison's summer plans, all while building a separate life I knew nothing about. 6 months of our friends and neighbors watching, whispering, pitying. "It's not your responsibility," I managed to say, placing the avocado in my cart, with deliberate care. "These things happen." Janet looked relieved, absolved of her bystander guilt. But as I wheeled my cart away, a new thought struck me with paralyzing force. How many others had known? How many dinners had I hosted? School events had I attended? Conversations had I participated in, while everyone around me knew my marriage was a fiction? That night, after Madison went to bed, I sat at our kitchen table with a glass of wine and Michael's address book open in front of me. It was an actual physical book. He'd always been oddly traditional about contact information, despite his technological savvy in every other area. I flipped through it, looking at names and wondering, did you know? How about you? When exactly did I become the neighborhood tragedy, the cautionary tale, the woman too blind to see what was happening in her own marriage? For the first time, since he left, rage replaced numbness. Pure, clarifying anger that burned through the fog of confusion and self-doubt. I was angry at Michael, of course. But I was also angry at every person who had witnessed our disintegration and said nothing. Every friend who chose silent pity over uncomfortable honesty. Everyone who had participated in making me the last to know about my own life. In that moment of anger, I did something I'd been avoiding for weeks. I logged into our shared photo cloud account. I hadn't looked at our digital archives since Michael left. Couldn't bear to see the evidence of what I'd thought was happiness. The most recent album was from Madison's spring choir concert, just 3 weeks before he left. There we were, the three of us, smiling outside the school auditorium. Michael's arm was around my waist. I was leaning into him, comfortable, trusting. Madison stood in front, holding her program, clearly pleased with her performance. I stared at that photo for a long time. We looked like a family. We looked connected, intact, real. And perhaps the most painful realization was that in that moment, for me, we had been. I hadn't been pretending. I hadn't been going through the motions. I had been fully present, fully invested, fully believing in the life we'd built. While Michael had already emotionally moved on, I was still there, still us, still believing. That discrepancy between my reality and his, between what I believed and what was actually happening, felt like a second betrayal. Not just the affair, not just the leaving, but the fundamental dishonesty of allowing me to continue investing in something he had already divested from. I scrolled back further, through birthdays and holidays, school events and vacations, searching for the moment when it changed. When did his smiles become perfunctory? When did the light in his eyes when he looked at me begin to dim? I couldn't pinpoint it, and that uncertainty was its own kind of torture. After several hours and another glass of wine, I forced myself to close the laptop. This archaeological dig through our digital past wasn't helping. It was just reinforcing the most painful lesson of the past 2 months. That memory is unreliable. That what I'd experienced as connection might have been performance. That I couldn't trust my own perceptions of my life. The next morning, I called Elaine, my sister who lived in Boston. We'd always been close, but I'd been avoiding her calls since the separation, not ready to articulate the collapse of my marriage to someone who had been maid of honor at my wedding. This time, I didn't try to sound brave or composed. I think I'm losing my mind, I told her when she answered. I don't know what was real anymore. Elaine listened as I poured out everything, the doubts, the humiliation, the disorienting experience of having my history rewritten without my consent. When I finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said something that became a lifeline in the weeks that followed. Becca, your experience was real. Your feelings were real. The fact that Michael is reframing everything now doesn't erase what you lived through. He doesn't get to retroactively decide what was true for you. It was such a simple statement, but it hit me with the force of revelation. Michael could rewrite our story to justify his choices. He could tell himself and Vanessa and anyone who would listen that our marriage had been dead for years. But that didn't make it true. His narrative didn't erase my lived experience. For years, I had loved deeply, committed fully, believed completely. That was my truth, regardless of his revisionist history. That conversation with Elaine marked a turning point. Not an immediate healing. Grief doesn't work that way. But the beginning of reclaiming my own narrative. I started small. I took down some of the family photos that felt like they were mocking me. but kept others that represented moments I knew were genuine. I repainted our bedroom in a deep teal that Michael would have hated, replacing the neutral gray he'd insisted upon. I signed up for a pottery class that met on Wednesday evenings, the night Michael had always had his client dinners that I now understood had been dates with Vanessa. I wasn't trying for dramatic transformation. I wasn't getting revenge tattoos, or booking solo trips to Bali or whatever middle-aged women in movies do after divorce. I was just trying to rebuild some sense of self that wasn't defined by being Michael's wife, Madison's mother, the neighborhood hostess with the perfect garden. I was trying to remember who Rebecca was, beneath all the roles I'd played so diligently. Madison watched these small changes with quiet attention. One evening, as I was unpacking a small bowl I'd made in pottery class, lopsided but glazed in a beautiful cobalt blue, she asked, "Are you different now, Mom?" The question caught me off guard. "Different how, sweetie?" She shrugged, tracing the rim of the bowl with one finger. "I don't know. Since Dad left. You seem, I don't know, more like yourself, maybe?" It was such an insightful observation from a 12-year-old that I had to pause before responding. "I'm figuring things out," I said finally. "When you're married to someone for a long time, sometimes you adjust yourself to fit with them. Now I'm remembering who I am when I'm not adjusting." Madison nodded, seeming to understand this concept better than many adults would. "I like this you," she said simply. "The one who makes crooked bowls and paints the walls colors Dad would hate." That conversation stayed with me. I'd been so focused on what I'd lost, on the humiliation of being left, that I hadn't fully acknowledged what might be gained. The space to rediscover myself, to make choices based solely on my own preferences, to live without constant accommodation. It wasn't a fair trade. I would have preferred to keep my family intact, but it was something to hold on to as I moved forward. The first time I saw Michael and Vanessa together was at Madison's school orchestra concert, 4 months after he left. I'd known they would both be there. Madison had mentioned that her father was bringing his friend to watch her play viola, but knowledge didn't prepare me for the physical impact. They were sitting 5 rows ahead of me, his arm draped, casually across the back of her chair, her blonde head occasionally tilting to whisper something that made him smile. They looked established, comfortable, matching in some indefinable way. The sight hit me in the solar plexus, knocking the wind from my lungs. This was real. This was happening. My husband, technically still my husband, as our divorce wasn't final, had created a new life that fit him better than the one we'd built over 17 years. I focused on breathing, on appearing normal, on not allowing anyone in that auditorium to see how deeply this visual confirmation had affected me. When the lights dimmed for the performance, I felt a rush of gratitude for the darkness that hid my face. I watched Madison on stage, her brow furrowed in concentration as she played, and reminded myself why I was there. For her, not for the adults in her life who had complicated everything. After the concert, we all converged in the lobby, the unavoidable moment of shared parenting. Michael looked uncomfortable but determined to act natural. Vanessa hung back slightly, a perfect balance of present but not intrusive. She was beautiful in that effortless way that makes other women feel slightly disheveled by comparison. Young but not inappropriately so. Stylish without being obvious about it. I hated her with a pure, clarifying intensity that both shocked and empowered me. "Great job, Madison," Michael said, hugging our daughter. "You sounded amazing." Madison accepted his praise with a small smile, then looked at me. I nodded, trying to convey all my pride and love without words. Vanessa stepped forward, hand extended toward me like we were at a business meeting. "It's nice to finally meet you, Rebecca. Madison is so talented." The surreality of shaking hands with the woman who had been sleeping with my husband while I was still making his lunches, still washing his clothes, still planning our future, nearly overwhelmed me. But Madison was watching. eyes moving between all the adults in her disrupted life. So I summoned every ounce of dignity I possessed. "Thank you," I said simply, neither warm nor openly hostile. "She works very hard." The interaction lasted less than 5 minutes, but it left me drained for days afterward. The careful choreography of politeness, the hyper-awareness of every expression crossing my face, the effort of not screaming, "How could you?" at both of them in the middle of a middle school lobby, it all exacted a toll I hadn't anticipated. That night, I cried for the first time in weeks. Not quiet tears, but messy, gulping sobs that left me exhausted. Madison found me in the bathroom, trying to wash away the evidence. "Mom?" she said, her voice small and frightened. I tried to smile, to reassure her. "It's okay, honey. Just a hard day. Everyone has them." She stepped into the bathroom and wrapped her arms around my waist, resting her head against my shoulder. "I didn't like seeing them together either," she whispered. "It felt wrong." I stroked her hair, torn between wanting to validate her feelings and needing to maintain some semblance of co-parenting harmony. "It's an adjustment for all of us," I said finally. "But your dad cares about you very much. That's the important thing to remember." Madison pulled back slightly, looking up at me with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see straight through adult pretenses. "It's okay to be sad, Mom. You don't have to pretend with me." Her words, so mature, so compassionate, broke something open inside me. This child, who should have been protected from adult pain, was now trying to protect me. I knelt down to her eye level, hands on her shoulders. "Listen to me, Madison. This is not your burden to carry. You get to have your own feelings about everything that's happening. You get to love your dad and spend time with him without worrying about how it affects me. That's what good parents want for their children, even when things are difficult between the adults." She nodded, but I could see she wasn't entirely convinced. The roles had shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated, my daughter now feeling responsible for my emotional well-being. It was one more loss to mourn, the simple parent-child dynamic where she could just be a kid, unburdened by adult complexities. In the weeks that followed, I worked hard to project stability and healing, whether I felt it or not. I joined a divorce support group that met at the community center. I started having coffee once a week with Lori, another single mom from Madison's school whose husband had left 2 years earlier. I even went on one excruciating dinner date with a history teacher Elaine's friend had set me up with. A nice man whose company I couldn't enjoy because the whole experience felt like a betrayal of a marriage that no longer existed. Life developed. A new rhythm. Madison spent every other weekend with Michael at the downtown condo he now shared with Vanessa. I filled those quiet weekends with projects around the house, occasional outings with new friends from my pottery class, long phone calls with Elaine. Madison and I developed Sunday night pizza and movie traditions for when she returned. Michael and I communicated primarily through text messages about logistics and Madison's schedule. On the surface, we were adjusting. Beneath, I still struggled, with waves of anger, confusion, and lingering disbelief that my life had been so dramatically altered without my consent. But those waves came less frequently, hit with less force. I began to imagine a future that wasn't defined by being left. A future with possibilities I hadn't considered when I thought my path was set. And then the wedding invitation arrived. A thick cream envelope with gold foil edging, addressed to both Madison and me in elegant calligraphy I didn't recognize. For a moment, I just stared at it on the kitchen counter, knowing instinctively what it contained, but unable to make myself open it. Finally, with a deep breath, I slid my finger under the seal. Inside was a card with a watercolor image of the gardens, Silver Lake's most exclusive wedding venue, and flowing script. Michael Winters and Vanessa Clark joyfully request your presence as they unite their lives in marriage. The date was just 2 months away. At the bottom, a handwritten note. We would be honored to have Madison participate as a flower girl alongside Lily. I read it 3 times, trying to process the audacity. They were inviting me, the not-yet ex-wife, to watch Michael marry the woman he'd left me for. They were asking my daughter to participate in a ceremony that would formally replace the family she'd known her entire life. The presumption was breathtaking. The casualness with which they presented this request, as if it were completely normal, made me question my own sanity again. There was no personal note, no acknowledgement of the awkwardness, just an RSVP card with a space to indicate meal preference and a website for their registry. I ran my fingers over the embossed lettering, the heavy cardstock, the careful artistry that had gone into designing this announcement of my formal replacement. It was beautiful, tasteful, expensive. Exactly what Michael would want to present to the world. I wanted to tear it up. I wanted to call Michael and demand to know what kind of person invites their ex to watch them marry their affair partner. I wanted to protect Madison from being used as an accessory in their perfect family narrative. But before I could decide what to do, Madison walked in from school and saw the envelope on the counter. She picked it up slowly, her face composed. In that careful way children manage when they're trying to appear unfazed by things that hurt them deeply. "Dad's getting married," she said flatly. Not a question. She examined the invitation, running her fingers over the raised lettering, the watercolor venue illustration, the RSVP card with its little flower girl checkbox. Finally, she looked up at me with eyes too serious for a 12-year-old. "Are we going?" I didn't know what to say. Every instinct in me screamed to protect her and myself from the spectacle of Michael's new beginning. From the inevitable whispers, the pitying glances, the awkward conversations with people who had known us as a couple, but Madison was old enough to have a say in her relationship with her father, and I couldn't let my hurt dictate her choices. "Do you want to go?" I asked carefully. She was quiet for a long moment, still holding the invitation, her expression thoughtful. "I think I should," she finally said. "Dad said Lily really wants me to be in the wedding with her." Another pause. "And I think I need to see it, to understand that it's really happening." Her answer surprised me. Not the part about participating. Madison had always been responsible, always wanted to please others, especially her father. What caught me off guard was her comment about needing to see it happen. There was something in her voice, something beyond the typical people-pleasing I was used to hearing, something I couldn't quite identify. "Are you sure, sweetie? No one would blame you if you didn't want to be part of it." Madison nodded, a determination in her eyes that seemed beyond her years. "I'm sure. I need to be there." I took a deep breath, swallowing my own reservations. "Okay then. If you want to be in the wedding, I'll let your dad know." "What about you?" she asked. "Will you come to the reception?" The question was genuine, curious, without the manipulation adults might layer into such a loaded inquiry. I hesitated. The thought of sitting through that wedding, watching Michael pledge forever to someone new when he'd broken that promise to me, made my stomach turn. But the idea of sending Madison alone, without my support, seemed equally wrong. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "Maybe just the reception, not the ceremony itself." Madison seemed satisfied with this answer. She handed me the invitation and headed upstairs to start her homework, leaving me standing in the kitchen wondering exactly what I'd just agreed to. That night, after Madison went to bed, I sat on our back patio with a glass of wine, trying to imagine myself at that wedding. Trying to picture sitting in some back corner of the gardens, watching Michael promise forever to someone new, knowing everyone in attendance was aware that he had made, and broken, those same promises to me. The thought made me physically ill. But Madison wanted to participate, and I wouldn't stand in the way of her relationship with her father, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, I texted Michael that Madison would like to be a flower girl. His response came quickly. Great. Vanessa will be thrilled. She's already ordered the dresses. We'll need to schedule a fitting. Just like that, as if asking your preteen to participate in your wedding, to the woman you left her mother for was the most normal request in the world. No acknowledgement of the awkwardness, no recognition of how painful this must be. Just practical details about fittings and schedules. I stared at my phone, composing and deleting multiple responses before finally settling on, I'll bring her. To the fitting. Just let me know when and where. Neutral, practical, focused on Madison. It was the tone I'd been working to maintain in all our interactions, but this particular exchange left me seething. He got to move on seamlessly, to plan his perfect new life, while I was left to manage the emotional fallout, to help our daughter navigate this upside-down reality, to swallow my own pain in service of her relationship with him. 2 days later, Michael called instead of texting, unusual in our new communication pattern. "Have you decided if you're coming to the wedding?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I gripped the phone tighter. "I'm considering the reception. I don't think sitting through the ceremony would be appropriate." He made a sound that might have been relief. "That's fine. Vanessa thinks it would be good for Madison to see us all getting along. For closure." Closure, as if my attendance at his wedding to the woman he'd had an affair with would neatly tie up the loose ends of our 17-year marriage. As if watching them exchange vows would heal the wounds of betrayal and humiliation. The presumption was so staggering I couldn't immediately respond. "Rebecca, are you still there?" Michael's voice had that tone of impatience I knew well from our final years together. The one that signaled he thought I was being difficult unnecessarily. "Yes," I said finally. "I'll RSVP for the reception, for Madison's sake." He thanked me, sounding genuinely relieved, and we hung up after finalizing details for Madison's dress fitting. I sat at the kitchen table after the call, trying to understand what had just happened. I had agreed to attend the wedding reception of my husband and his affair partner, mainly because they thought it would be good for Madison. But something about the conversation left me uneasy, beyond the obvious awkwardness of the situation. It was the casualness with which Michael and Vanessa were incorporating Madison, and by extension, me, into their narrative. As if we were supporting characters in their love story rather than people whose lives had been upended by their choices. More troubling was the realization that they were using Madison as both a prop in their perfect family tableau and a shield against criticism. Who could object to their relationship, their hasty marriage, when they were so thoughtfully including Michael's daughter? When even his ex-wife was attending the celebration. It was a masterful bit of image management, and I had just agreed to participate. That evening, Madison and I were preparing dinner together when she asked, seemingly out of nowhere, "Mom, do you still have your wedding album? The one with you and Dad?" The question startled me. I hadn't looked at that album since Michael left, had in fact hidden it in the back of my closet, because seeing those hopeful young faces was too painful. "I think so," I said carefully, dicing tomatoes for the salad. "Why do you ask?" Madison shrugged, stirring pasta sauce with more concentration than the task required. "Just curious about what your wedding was like, since Dad's having a new one." The simple honesty of her statement made my chest ache. Of course she would. Be curious. Of course she would be trying to make sense of the contradiction between the promises made at our wedding and the reality of where we now found ourselves. "We can look at it together if you want," I offered, though the thought made me anxious. "After dinner?" Madison nodded, her expression brightening slightly. "That would be good. And maybe you have other old pictures too, from when you and Dad were dating?" I agreed, wondering where this sudden interest in our family history was coming from, but grateful for any opportunity to connect with my increasingly introspective daughter. After dinner, we pulled out not just the wedding album, but several boxes of photographs that had been languishing in the hall closet. We spread them across the living room floor, tangible evidence of a shared past that now felt like it belonged to different people. Madison pored over them with intense focus, asking questions about when and where they were taken, who various people were, what specific occasions they commemorated. I found myself telling stories I hadn't accessed in years. Our first apartment, with the leaky faucet and noisy neighbors. The road trip to the Grand Canyon where we got hopelessly lost but discovered a beautiful hidden waterfall. The day we brought Madison home from the hospital, both terrified and exhilarated by the responsibility of this tiny human. It was strangely cathartic, looking at these images with Madison. Painful, yes, but also a reminder that regardless of how things ended, there had been genuine joy, real connection, authentic love. Michael might have rewritten our history in his mind, but these photographs told a different story, one where we had been happy, at least for a time. As we were putting the photos away, Madison asked, "Can I keep some of these for my project?" I realized she'd been setting certain images aside as we went through them. Photos of Michael and me in our early years, family vacation snapshots, holiday gatherings, moments from Madison's childhood with both parents present. "What project?" I asked, curious about this collection she was curating. Madison hesitated, suddenly seeming guarded. "Just something I'm working on, for school, about family history." The explanation sounded plausible enough, but something in her tone gave me pause. Madison was typically open about her schoolwork, often discussing assignments with me as she worked on them. This secretiveness was new. "Of course you can keep them," I said, deciding not to press further. "Just take good care of them." She gathered her selected photos carefully, along with the wedding album I had surprisingly agreed to let her borrow, and took them to her room. I cleaned up the remaining boxes, wondering what exactly my daughter was planning, but trusting her enough to give her space for whatever processing she needed to do. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, I noticed Madison becoming increasingly quiet, spending more time on her tablet, asking me unusual questions about my relationship with her father. "Were you happy with Dad at the beginning? When did you know something was wrong? Do you think what Dad did was fair?" Each time I tried to answer honestly but carefully, to give her the truth without transferring my pain to her. It was an exhausting balancing act, trying to honor her need for understanding while protecting her from adult complexities. I also noticed Madison taking more interest in our family videos stored on the cloud. She asked for my password to access them, spent hours watching footage of birthdays, holidays, vacations, moments when we had been intact as a family. When I asked what she was looking for in all this archived material, she just shrugged and said, "I just want to remember what it was like before." The simplicity and sadness of her answer broke my heart. Of course she wanted to revisit a time when her world made sense, when her parents lived under the same roof, when family wasn't a complicated negotiation of schedules and separate celebrations. I gave her space to explore these memories, though I worried about whether immersing herself in the past was helping or hurting her adjustment to our new reality. As the wedding date approached, Madison began spending more time in her room with the door closed. Several times I heard her talking, though when I passed by, it didn't sound like she was on the phone with a friend. It almost sounded like practicing? Rehearsing something? When I asked casually at dinner one evening if she was working on a presentation for school, she just nodded vaguely and changed the subject. One evening, about 2 weeks before the wedding, I knocked on her door to call her for dinner and found her surrounded by printed photos, screenshots from videos, and a notebook filled with what looked like a timeline. She had her tablet propped up, displaying a video of Michael giving a toast at my birthday dinner 3 years earlier, his arm around my shoulders as he spoke about the love of my life. "What's all this, sweetie?" I asked, gesturing to the materials spread across her bed. She gathered them quickly, sliding them into a folder. "Just organizing some stuff. For me." Something in her expression, A mixture of determination and secretiveness gave me pause. "Madison, what are you planning?" She met my eyes directly, her gaze steadier than I expected. "Nothing bad, Mom. Just something I need to do." I should have pressed further, should have looked in that folder, asked more questions, figured out what my 12-year-old was plotting. But part of me didn't want to know. Part of me recognized that Madison was finding her own way to process this massive upheaval in her life, and I was too exhausted from my own emotional management to take on hers as well. So I just nodded and told her dinner was ready. The night before the wedding, I found Madison still awake at midnight, meticulously organizing something on her tablet. "Nervous about tomorrow?" I asked, sitting on the edge of her bed. She shook her head. "Not nervous, just making sure I'm ready." "Ready for what?" I wanted to ask. But something in her expression stopped me. There was a determination there I'd rarely seen before, a focus that seemed beyond her years. "Mom," she said after a moment, "did you ever feel like Dad was ashamed of you? Like you weren't good enough for him to show off to his fancy lawyer friends?" The question hit me like a physical blow. I'd never expressed that particular insecurity to Madison, had always been careful to shield her from the subtle ways Michael had made me feel inadequate in the later years of our marriage. Yet somehow she'd perceived it anyway. Sometimes, I admitted, deciding honesty was better than protection at this point. Your father and I wanted different things as we grew older. He became more focused on appearances, on status. I was content with what we had. Madison nodded slowly, absorbing this. "I heard him tell Vanessa once that you were too small town for where his career was headed. Like you were holding him back or something." I took a deep breath, fighting the fresh wave of hurt her words triggered. When relationships end, people sometimes say unkind things to justify their choices. It doesn't mean they're true. Madison looked unconvinced. But if they weren't true, why would he need to say them at all? It was a startlingly astute question from a 12-year-old, one I didn't have a good answer for. "I don't know, sweetheart. I think sometimes people need to rewrite history to feel better about decisions that hurt others." She was quiet for a moment, then asked, "Are you coming tomorrow? To the reception?" I nodded. "Yes, I'll be there to support you." What I didn't say was that I'd also be there to ensure she was okay, to provide an escape if the emotional weight of the day became too much. I wouldn't abandon her to be a prop in Michael and Vanessa's perfect day. "Good," Madison said firmly. "I want you there." Something in her tone gave me pause. It wasn't just that she wanted my emotional support. There was an undercurrent I couldn't quite decipher. "Madison, what are you planning?" I asked directly this time. She held my gaze steadily. "I'm just going to tell the truth, Mom. That's all." Before I could press further, she yawned dramatically. "I'm really tired. Big day tomorrow." I hesitated, torn between my growing concern and my desire to trust her. Finally, I leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I love you. No matter what happens tomorrow, remember that." She hugged me back tightly. "I love you too. And I know you always told me the truth, even when it was hard." It felt like she was trying to tell me something important, but exhaustion and anxiety clouded my ability to piece it together. I said goodnight and went to my own room, where I lay awake for hours, replaying our conversation and wondering what exactly my daughter had planned for her father's wedding day. Morning arrived with cruel brightness, sunlight streaming through the curtains I'd forgotten to close. Madison was already up, showered, and dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, the flower girl dress carefully packed in a garment bag. She seemed calmer than I expected, eating a bowl of cereal with unusual focus, checking her small crossbody purse repeatedly as if confirming the contents were intact. "Dad's picking you up at 11, right?" I asked, pouring myself coffee. She nodded. Vanessa texted to say they're running on schedule. The hair and makeup person is meeting us at the gardens at noon. The casual mention of Vanessa texting, my daughter directly still sparked a flare of resentment, but I swallowed it down. This was our reality now. Another woman in Madison's life, establishing direct communication, building a relationship independent of me. I made myself busy with small tasks, trying to distract from the anxiety building in my chest. As 11 approached, I found myself watching Madison with growing concern. There was a stillness about her, a composure that seemed almost adult-like. She had packed her purse with unusual care, her phone, some photos I'd seen her selecting earlier, a small notebook, and something else I couldn't quite identify. When the doorbell rang, Madison straightened her shoulders before heading to answer it. Michael stood on the porch, looking polished in casual clothes that probably cost more than my entire outfit for the reception. "Ready for the big day, Mads?" he asked, his smile bright but slightly strained. Madison nodded, picking up her dress bag and purse. "All set." Michael nodded awkwardly in my direction. "Rebecca, we'll see you at the reception then?" I forced a neutral expression. "I'll be there at 6. Madison hugged me with surprising intensity before leaving, whispering, "It's going to be okay, Mom," in my ear. It struck me as odd. Shouldn't I be the one reassuring her? But before I could respond, she was walking down the path to Michael's BMW, her posture determined, her steps unwavering. I spent the hours before the reception in a state of nervous anticipation. I tried reading, gardening, even cleaning out a junk drawer. Anything. To keep my mind from fixating on what was happening at the gardens. By 5 o'clock, I was dressed in the navy blue sheath dress I'd purchased specifically for this occasion, my hair styled more carefully than usual, makeup applied with precision. If I had to witness my husband marrying another woman, I would at least look composed doing it. The drive to the gardens took 20 minutes, each mile increasing the tightness in my chest. The venue was nestled in 50 acres of manicured grounds at the edge of town, flowing gardens, a small lake, granite pathways winding between outdoor ceremony spaces and elegant reception areas. As I pulled into the parking area, I could see white chairs being cleared from the ceremony site, staff efficiently transforming the space for evening festivities. I sat in my car for several minutes, gathering courage. This would be difficult. There was no way around that fact. I would be facing not just Michael and Vanessa as newlyweds, but dozens of people who knew me as Michael's former wife, who had witnessed our family before it fractured, who had likely discussed the demise of our marriage over dinner tables and coffee dates. Finally, I took a deep breath, checked my lipstick one last time, and stepped out of the car. I followed the signs to the reception pavilion, a stunning structure with glass walls offering views of the garden and lake beyond. Cocktail hour was already underway, guests in summer finery mingling on the terrace, champagne flutes in hand. I scanned the crowd for Madison, needing to connect with her before engaging with anyone else. Several people noticed me arriving. Double takes, whispered comments behind hands, curious glances. I kept my chin high, my expression neutral, as I navigated through clusters of conversation that briefly paused as I passed. I spotted Madison near the small decorative waterfall at the edge of the terrace. She was still in her flower girl dress, a pale pink confection with a satin sash, her hair styled in loose curls with tiny flowers woven through. But her expression didn't match the fairy tale outfit. She looked serious, watchful, her eyes tracking the movement of guests with unusual attention. "Hey, beautiful," I said, approaching her. "How was the ceremony?" Madison shrugged, adjusting the small purse slung across her body. "Fine. Dad cried when Vanessa walked down the aisle. Everyone said it was sweet." Her tone was flat, observational, rather than emotional. "You look really pretty," I offered, wondering at her detachment. "How are you feeling about everything?" Before she could answer, the wedding planner, a brisk woman with a headset and clipboard, appeared beside us. Madison, we're about to call everyone in for dinner. You'll be at the head table with your father and Vanessa, okay? Madison nodded. I'll be right there. As the planner moved away, Madison turned to me with sudden intensity. Where are you? Sitting, Mom? I checked the small place card in my clutch. Table 14, near the back. Okay, she said, seeming to file this information away. I need to go now, but remember what I said last night. Whatever happens, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. Before I could question this, cryptic reminder. She was walking toward the pavilion entrance, her pink dress swishing around her ankles, her back straight and determined. I found my assigned table, predictably located at the far edge of the reception space, populated with Michael's distant relatives from Michigan and a couple of Vanessa's co-workers who looked uncomfortable when they realized who I was. I introduced myself politely, accepted a glass of wine from a passing server, and prepared to endure the next few hours with as much dignity as possible. The reception proceeded with predictable elegance. The wedding party entrance, with Madison walking solemnly beside Vanessa's niece Lily. The newlyweds' grand entrance, met with enthusiastic applause. The first dance, Michael and Vanessa swaying to a love song I'd never heard, her head resting. On his shoulder, his hand splayed possessively across her back. I watched it all with a strange detachment, as if I were observing characters in a film rather than people who had altered the course of my life. Dinner was served, some elaborate, salmon dish I barely tasted. Champagne toasts were made by the best man and maid of honor, both carefully avoiding any mention of Michael's previous marriage, despite their long-standing friendship with both of us. I smiled when appropriate, clapped when everyone else did, maintained conversations with my table companions about safe topics like the weather and the beautiful venue. As dessert was being served, the DJ announced it was time for the father-daughter dance. Michael moved to the center of the dance floor, where Lily, Vanessa's 8-year-old niece, waited. They danced to some upbeat pop song, Michael twirling the little girl who giggled in delight. When the song ended, the DJ said, "And now Michael would like to share a special dance with his daughter, Madison." Madison walked to the center of the floor where her father waited, looking simultaneously young in her flower girl dress and strangely mature in her composed expression. The music started, Butterfly Kisses, the same song they danced to at a father-daughter dance when she was in first grade. They moved slowly, Michael occasionally leaning down to say something to Madison, who nodded seriously in response. As the song neared its end, I noticed the wedding planner approaching the DJ booth, followed by the exchange of whispered conversation and a nod. When the music faded, the DJ stepped forward with a wireless microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, the bride and groom have arranged for Madison to say a few words." My stomach dropped. This hadn't been mentioned to me. I wondered if it had been planned all along, or if Madison had somehow engineered this moment herself. Either way, alarm bells rang in my mind as my daughter took the microphone with steady hands, her expression surprisingly calm for a child about to speak before a crowded reception. "Thank you all for coming to celebrate my dad and Vanessa's wedding," she began, her voice clear and composed. The crowd smiled indulgently, just a cute kid saying something sweet and predictable. But then Madison reached into her small purse and pulled out her phone and what looked like printed photographs. Before I share my wishes for the happy couple, I wanted to share something with everyone here, especially with Vanessa. She tapped her phone, and suddenly, through the reception pavilion speakers came Michael's voice, clearly from a recording. "Rebecca was just a practice run. Someone safe and simple while I built my career. We got together way too young. I've outgrown what she has to offer." Vanessa's laugh followed. "Well, I guess she served her purpose then." Michael again. "You're what I need now. Rebecca was just marking time." A collective gasp rippled through the reception. Michael's face drained of color. Vanessa's perfect smile froze in place. Madison continued, her voice stronger now. "That was from 2 months ago. when Dad didn't realize his car Bluetooth connected to my tablet in the back seat. He didn't know. It was recording. She held up a printed photograph. Our family at Disney World, all smiles in front of the castle. This is what marking time looked like to me. Another photo, Christmas morning the previous year, all three of us in matching pajamas. This is what Dad called safe and simple. More photos followed, more family moments, each one narrated by Madison's calm commentary. This was our family vacation to the Grand Canyon. This was Mom's birthday, when Dad said she was the best thing that ever happened to him. This was the last Valentine's Day card Dad gave Mom 4 months before he left. The room had gone completely silent. No clinking glasses, no whispered conversations, no music. Just my 12-year-old daughter methodically presenting evidence that contradicted the convenient narrative Michael had created to justify his choices. She wasn't angry or tearful. She was composed, deliberate, like a tiny prosecutor presenting a case. Finally, she looked directly at Vanessa. "I'm not trying to ruin your wedding. I hope you'll be happy together. But I needed everyone to know that my mom wasn't some practice round. She wasn't boring or easy to replace. She was his wife for 17 years. She loved him completely. And he rewrote our whole family history to make his choices seem okay." Madison turned to face the entire reception. "So congratulations on your wedding. I wish you both happiness. But I want everyone in this room to know that my mother deserved better than the story my father has been telling about their marriage. She deserved the truth, and now you all have it." She handed the microphone back to the stunned DJ, collected her phone and photos, and walked directly toward the exit, her pink dress swishing with each determined step. The silence held for another heartbeat. Then the murmuring began, rising quickly to a low roar of shocked conversations. Michael stood frozen in the middle of the dance floor. Vanessa had disappeared. The perfect wedding reception had imploded in less than 5 minutes. I sat in shock, unable to process what had just happened. My daughter, my quiet, thoughtful, people-pleasing daughter, had just publicly exposed her father's revisionist history of our marriage in the middle of his wedding reception. She had defended me when I'd been trying so hard not to burden her with my pain. She had spoken a truth I'd been carefully avoiding articulating, even to myself, that Michael had rewritten our past to justify his present. After the initial paralysis wore off, I rose from my table and followed Madison's path outside, finding her sitting calmly on a stone bench in the garden. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said when she saw me. "I know you tried to be the bigger person. But I couldn't just stand there and pretend like Dad didn't erase everything we had." I sat beside her, my heart racing with a mixture of shock, pride, and something that felt strangely like liberation. "How long have you been planning this?" I asked. Madison shrugged. "Since the invitation came. I heard Dad and Vanessa talking. About me that day he picked me up to go look at flower girl dresses. They didn't know I could hear them from the hallway. Dad said it was good I was participating because it would help with the optics and show everyone how evolved they were. Like I was just some prop for their perfect wedding pictures." Her insight took my breath away. This perceptive child had seen through the careful image management, had recognized how she was being used, had understood the narrative being constructed around our family's dissolution. After that, I started recording things when I was with them. Not all the time, just when I thought they might talk about you or our family. I needed evidence. I needed to know I wasn't imagining things. "That's why you wanted all those old photos," I realized. Madison nodded. "I needed to remind myself what was real, that we weren't just some mistake Dad made before he found his real life, that the family we had mattered." She looked at me, eyes suddenly vulnerable. "Are you mad at me? For ruining their wedding?" I considered the question carefully. Was I? Part of me was shocked by the public nature of Madison's revelation, concerned about the fallout this would have on her relationship with her father. But another part, maybe the larger part, felt vindicated. Not because Michael's special day had been disrupted, but because the truth had finally been spoken aloud. The revisionist history he'd been constructing had been challenged by the most credible witness, his own daughter. "No," I said finally. "I'm not mad. I'm surprised, and I'm worried about how this might affect your relationship with your dad. But I'm also proud of your courage. Standing up for the truth is hard, even when it's uncomfortable." Madison leaned against me, suddenly looking like the 12-year-old she was rather than the composed young woman who had just commanded a room of adults. "I don't think Dad's going to be very happy with me." "Probably not," I agreed, unwilling to sugarcoat what would likely be a difficult conversation. "But real relationships can withstand hard truths. If he loves you, and I know he does, he'll work through this with you." I didn't know if I believed that completely, but I needed to offer her hope that she hadn't permanently damaged her relationship with her father. We sat in silence for a few moments, watching twilight deepen over the gardens. Inside the pavilion, I could see people moving about, conversations happening in agitated clusters, staff looking uncertain about how to proceed. The fairy tale wedding had transformed into something messier, more complicated, more real. "Should we go home?" Madison asked finally. I nodded, suddenly exhausted by the emotional weight of the day. "I think that's a good idea. We can talk more about all of this tomorrow." As we stood to leave, Madison looked back at the reception one last time. "Do you think they'll still get married? After this?" It was a question I hadn't considered. Would this public revelation of Michael's duplicity change Vanessa's feelings? Would it alter their perfect narrative enough to disrupt their plans? "I don't know, sweetheart, but that's not for us to worry about now." I guided her toward the parking lot, both of us eager to escape the beautiful gardens that now felt like the scene of an emotional earthquake. At home, Madison changed out of her flower girl dress, hanging it carefully in her closet like a costume from a play that had finished its run. I made hot chocolate, an old comfort from her younger years, and we sat on the couch together watching a mindless cooking competition show until she fell asleep against my shoulder. I carried her to bed, tucking her in like I used to when she was smaller, overwhelmed by a rush of protective love. This child, who I had been trying so hard to shield from adult complexities, had instead taken it upon herself to shield me, to defend the family we'd been, to ensure that our history wasn't erased or diminished to make someone else's choices more palatable. I didn't hear from Michael that night, which didn't surprise me. I imagined he and Vanessa were having difficult conversations of their own. Their wedding night transformed from romantic celebration to relationship crisis management. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy. No one's wedding should end in public humiliation, regardless of the circumstances. But another part, the part that had endured months of being rewritten as Michael's starter wife, felt a sense of justice in the truth finally being spoken aloud. The next morning, Madison slept late, exhausted from the emotional toll of the day before. I let her rest, spending the morning in the garden, pulling weeds with unusual focus, as if I could extract the complicated feelings about yesterday's events as cleanly as I removed dandelions from between my tomato plants. Around noon, my phone chimed with a text from Michael. "We need to talk about what happened yesterday. Can I come by later to speak with Madison?" I stared at the message, considering how to respond. I wanted to protect Madison from Michael's anger or disappointment, but I also recognized that they needed to work through this disruption in their relationship. "She's still sleeping," I replied. "I'll ask her when she wakes up if she feels ready to talk today." It was the truth, but also a boundary. I wouldn't commit Madison to a difficult conversation until I knew she was emotionally prepared for it. When Madison finally woke and came downstairs in her pajamas, hair tousled from sleep, she looked younger and more vulnerable than she had in months. "Morning," she mumbled, heading for the cereal cabinet. I watched her pour Cheerios and milk, wondering how to broach the subject of yesterday's events. "Your dad texted," I said finally. "He wants to talk with you about what happened." Madison paused, spoon halfway to her mouth. "Is he mad?" The question held both defiance and worry. I chose my words carefully. "He didn't say exactly how he's feeling, but it's natural that he would want to discuss it with you." Madison nodded, slowly returning to her cereal. "I knew he would be upset, but I'm not sorry I did it." "You don't have to see him today if you're not ready," I assured her. "This was a big thing, and it's okay to take some time to process it yourself first." Madison considered this, then shook her head. "No, I want to talk to him. I need to explain why I did it, not for him, but for me." There was a maturity in her response that both impressed and saddened me. 12-year-olds shouldn't have to navigate these kinds of emotional complexities, shouldn't have to explain standing up for truth to the adults who should be modeling it. I texted Michael that Madison was willing to see him, suggesting mid-afternoon. His response came quickly. "I'll be there at 3. What followed was a strange, suspended morning. Madison and I moved around the house in our weekend routine. Laundry, light cleaning, a puzzle we'd started the week before, but with the knowledge that an emotional reckoning was approaching. Around 2:30, Madison disappeared upstairs, returning 15 minutes later dressed in jeans and a t-shirt, her hair neatly brushed, her expression composed. "Do you want me to stay with you when Dad comes?" I asked. She considered this, then shook her head. "I think I need to talk to him alone, but maybe you could stay in the kitchen, just in case." The doorbell rang precisely at 3. When I opened it, Michael stood on the porch looking like he hadn't slept, eyes shadowed, posture less confident than usual. "Rebecca," he said, nodding slightly. "Is she ready to talk?" I stepped back to let him in. "She is. She's in the living room. She asked to speak with you alone, but I'll be in the kitchen if she needs me." Michael moved past me toward the living room where Madison waited, perched on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap. I retreated to the kitchen, close enough to intervene if needed, but far enough to give them privacy. I could hear the low murmur of their voices but couldn't make out specific words. After about 20 minutes, the volume increased enough that fragments reached me. Madison's voice. "Because you made it seem like we never mattered." Michael's response, tense. "Complicated adult situations that you can't fully understand." Madison again, firmer. "I understand enough to know when someone's lying about our family." Then Michael, voice raised enough that I heard clearly. "You humiliated me in front of everyone I work with, everyone important to me and Vanessa." And Madison, with devastating clarity. "You humiliated Mom in front of everyone when you told them your marriage was just practice for your real life." Silence followed this exchange, so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Then Michael's voice again, quieter now, words I couldn't distinguish. More conversation at lower volumes, the occasional sigh or pause, until finally, footsteps approached the kitchen. Michael appeared in the doorway, looking drained. "I'm leaving now," he said flatly. "Madison and I have talked." I nodded, unwilling to ask for details he clearly wasn't eager to share. "Thank you for coming to speak with her directly." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture from our married life that suddenly seemed like it belonged to someone else entirely. "The honeymoon's been postponed. Vanessa and I have some things to work through." I didn't know how to respond to this information. Should I apologize for the disruption to their plans? Express sympathy for their marital crisis less than 24 hours after their wedding? Neither felt authentic, so I simply nodded again. "I hope you can both find a way forward that feels right." Michael hesitated in the doorway, seeming on the verge of saying something else. Instead, he just turned and left, the front door closing behind him with a quiet click rather than the angry slam I had half expected. I waited a moment before joining Madison in the living room, giving her space to collect herself if needed. I found her still sitting on the couch looking thoughtful but not distraught. "Are you okay?" I asked, settling beside her. Madison nodded. "Yeah, I think so. He was mad at first, but then he kind of deflated." She traced the pattern on the couch cushion with one finger. "He said Vanessa kept him up all night asking questions about whether what I played was really how he talks about you. If he really thinks our family was just some stepping stone. That must have been a difficult conversation for them," I said, trying to maintain neutrality despite the small spark of vindication I felt. Madison looked up at me. "He said he was sorry for what I heard in the car. That he doesn't really think of you and me as just some phase he had to get through. That he was just trying to make Vanessa feel secure by making it seem like you weren't important." The explanation was so perfectly Michael, justifying hurtful behavior as strategic, as if calculated harm was somehow more acceptable than genuine cruelty. "What did you say to that?" I asked. Madison's expression turned serious. "I told him that if he has to lie about the past to make his present work, maybe his present isn't as perfect as he wants everyone to think." I blinked, startled by the wisdom in her observation. "That's really insightful, Madison." She shrugged. "It's just true. If he and Vanessa are so great together, why does he have to pretend we were nothing?" It was the essential question, the one I'd been struggling with myself. Why couldn't our past family and his new beginning coexist as different chapters of the same life? Why did one have to be diminished for the other to flourish? "Dad said they're postponing their honeymoon," Madison continued. "Vanessa's pretty upset. Not just about what I played, but about how he handled it afterward. I guess he got defensive instead of just admitting he said those things." That sounded like the Michael I knew. Doubling down rather than acknowledging a mistake, attempting to manage perceptions rather than address the underlying issue. "How do you feel about all this?" I asked, more concerned about Madison's emotional state than the details of Michael and Vanessa's conflict. She considered the question carefully. "Relieved, I think. Like I was carrying around this big secret about how Dad really talks about us, and now it's out, so I don't have to pretend I don't know." She looked at me directly. "I'm not sorry. I did it, Mom. Even if Dad's mad at me for a while, the truth matters." In that moment, looking at my daughter's resolute expression, I felt a profound mix of pride and sadness. Pride in her moral clarity, her courage, her unwillingness to participate in comfortable lies. Sadness that at 12, she'd been forced into such an adult reckoning that she'd had to defend the validity of her own family history, that she'd shouldered a burden I hadn't even fully recognized she was carrying. "The truth does matter," I agreed, pulling her into a hug. "And I'm proud of you for standing up for it, even when it was hard. But I'm also sorry you felt you had to. That should never have been your responsibility." Madison leaned into the embrace, suddenly seeming younger than she had in months. "I know, but sometimes kids have to remind grown-ups about things they should already know." That evening, as we were making dinner together, Madison asked suddenly, "Do you think Dad and Vanessa will still be married? Like, will this change everything?" It was a question I'd been wondering myself. Would this public revelation be a temporary disruption to their new life, or would it create fissures too significant to repair? "I don't know," I answered honestly. Relationships are complicated. They might work through this together, or they might find it changes how they see each other. Either way, it's not something you need to worry about. Madison nodded, returning to chopping vegetables with careful concentration. "I just hope Dad learns that you can't build something good on top of lies, even if the truth is messier." Again, I was struck by her insight, her ability to articulate complex emotional truths that many adults struggle to recognize. That's very wise, Madison. And you're right. Honesty might be harder initially, but it's the only foundation that really supports a relationship long term. We ate dinner on the back patio, enjoying the mild summer evening, talking about lighter topics. A book Madison was reading, plans for the upcoming week, whether the tomatoes in our garden would finally ripen. It felt like exhaling after holding our breath for too long. This return to ordinary conversation after months of navigating extraordinary emotional terrain. As I cleared the plates, Madison looked out over the garden we'd planted together in the spring, vegetables and flowers now flourishing in neat beds. "Mom?" she said, her voice contemplative. "I'm really glad we're still us. Even without Dad. I'm glad we didn't disappear." Bah, it was such a simple statement, but it captured exactly what I'd been fighting for since Michael left: to preserve our sense of family, of connection, of continuity despite the fracture. To ensure that Madison knew her history was real and valid, not just a footnote in someone else's story. "We didn't disappear," I assured her. "We've changed, but we're still us. We always will be." Later, after Madison had gone to bed, I sat on the patio with a glass of wine, replaying the events of the past 2 days. My daughter had done something both brave and reckless, something that forced a reckoning no one had been prepared for. She had insisted on truth in a situation where everyone, including me, had been willing to accommodate comfortable fictions. The fallout was still unfolding, would likely continue for weeks or months. But underneath the complexity of emotions was a sense of clarity I hadn't felt since Michael left. Whatever happened next with Michael and Vanessa, whatever adjustments we all made to our relationships and expectations, we would be operating from a place of truth rather than convenient narratives. My marriage wasn't just Michael's practice. Run. Madison and I weren't just stepping stones on his path to a more suitable life. Our family had been real, had mattered, had existed exactly as we remembered it. And no one's revisionist history, not even from the man who had been husband and father, could erase that reality. As I finished my wine, watching stars appear in the darkening sky, I felt something shift inside me, a release of the lingering doubt that had haunted me since Michael left. I didn't need external validation of my experience anymore. I didn't need Michael to acknowledge the value of our years together. The truth existed independently of his willingness to recognize it. And thanks to Madison's unexpected courage, that truth had finally been spoken aloud. Madison nodded, resuming her planting. "I'd like to talk to him. If he's really ready to be honest." We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the rhythm of gardening creating a meditative space for reflection. Finally, Madison said, "I'm glad I took the microphone that day, even though it was scary, even though it caused a lot of drama." I looked at my daughter, her hands dirty from planting future blooms, her expression thoughtful beyond her years, and felt a surge of pride and wonder. "I'm glad too," I admitted. "Not because it hurt your father or disrupted his wedding, but because it created space for truth that might not have existed otherwise." Madison smiled, a genuine expression that lightened her features. "Sometimes the truth is all tangled up with other stuff, and you have to be brave enough to pull it out anyway." In that moment, her wisdom took my breath away. This child, who had been forced to navigate adult complexities far too early, had somehow extracted profound insight from the experience. "You're right," I agreed. "And your courage that day changed something for all of us. Created the possibility for honesty that might not have existed otherwise." Madison shrugged, suddenly self-conscious about the praise. "I just couldn't stand the pretending anymore. It was making me feel crazy, like my memories weren't real." I reached over and squeezed her soil-covered hand. "Your memories are real. Our family was real. Nothing can rewrite that truth, no matter what stories people tell themselves to make difficult choices easier." Madison squeezed back. "I know that now. and I think Dad is starting to remember it too. The conversation with Michael happened the following week. He came to our house on a Sunday afternoon, at Madison's request. She wanted to be on home territory, she said, where she felt most secure. I made myself scarce, retreating to my studio at the back of the house to give them privacy while remaining close enough if Madison needed me. Through the partially open window, I could hear fragments of their conversation. Madison's clear, direct questions, Michael's more hesitant responses. I resisted the urge to move closer, to hover protectively. This was Madison's conversation, to have, her relationship to navigate. My role was to support, not to interfere. After about an hour, I heard the front door open and close. A few minutes later, Madison appeared in the doorway of my studio, her expression pensive but not upset. "How did it go?" I asked, setting down my paintbrush. She came in and settled on the window seat, drawing her knees up to her chest. "Better than I expected," she said after a moment. He actually apologized, not one of those fake, "I'm sorry if you felt hurt" apologies, but a real one. But she traced a pattern on the cushion with one finger. He said he was wrong to talk about you and me the way he did, that he was trying to make himself feel better about leaving by pretending our family wasn't important. I nodded, giving her space to process. He said therapy is helping him see how much he lies to himself, she continued, and that he's sorry he made me feel like I had to defend our memories. She looked up at me, a mixture of emotions crossing her face. "Do you think people can really change, Mom? Like fundamentally change how they see things?" It was a profound question, one I'd been wrestling with myself since my own conversations with Michael and Vanessa. "I think," I said carefully, "that people can develop awareness of their patterns. And once they see those patterns clearly, they have the choice to respond differently. But it takes tremendous commitment and constant vigilance. It's not a one-time decision." Madison considered this. Dad said something like that too, that he's trying to catch himself when he starts rewriting things. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "He told me about the annulment, that he and Vanessa are going to keep working on things but not as husband and wife." "How do you feel about that?" I asked, curious about her reaction. Madison shrugged. "Relieved, I guess." Their wedding felt wrong from the beginning, like they were rushing to prove something. Her insight, as always, cut straight to a truth I hadn't fully articulated even to myself. "He also said he doesn't expect me to forgive him right away," she continued. "That he wants to rebuild trust by being consistent and honest from now on." She looked at me with those perceptive eyes. "Is it okay that I want to believe him, even though he's messed up a lot?" I moved to sit beside her on the window seat, careful not to get paint on her clothes. "Of course it's okay. He's your father, and despite everything, you love him. It's natural to want to believe people can change, especially people we care about." I smoothed a strand of hair behind her ear. "Just remember that trust is rebuilt slowly, through actions, not just words. It's okay to be hopeful while still being careful with your heart." Madison leaned against me slightly. "That's basically what I told him, that I want us to have a good relationship, but that he needs to prove he can be honest, not just say he will be." I wrapped an arm around her shoulders, amazed again by her emotional intelligence. "That sounds like a very mature approach." "I learned it from you," she said simply. "Watching how you handled everything when he left. You never made me hate him, even when you had every right to be angry." Her observation brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Through all the painful months of separation and divorce, I had worried constantly about finding the right balance, protecting Madison without poisoning her relationship with her father. It seemed, at least in this moment, that I had managed better than I'd realized. "Thank you for noticing that," I said softly. "It wasn't always easy." Madison nodded against my shoulder. I know. That's why it means so much. The weeks that followed brought a gradual evolution in our complicated family dynamics. Michael maintained his commitment to therapy, to rebuilding. His relationship with Madison through consistent, honest interaction rather than grand gestures. He began showing up for her in ways that mattered, attending her orchestra concerts without Vanessa in tow, responding thoughtfully to her texts rather than with quick platitudes, listening more than he spoke during their weekend visits. More surprising was the continued development of a cautious friendship between Vanessa and Madison. They occasionally met for ice cream or to browse at the bookstore Madison loved, building a relationship independent of Michael or me. Vanessa seemed to genuinely enjoy Madison's company, to appreciate her perspective without trying to force a pseudo-parental role. And Madison, for her part, appeared to value having another adult in her life who was committed to honesty, even when it was uncomfortable. As for Michael and Vanessa's relationship, I gleaned bits and pieces from Madison and from the inevitable town gossip. They were still seeing each other, still in therapy together, but living separately and moving at a much slower pace. The annulment had been finalized with minimal drama. They were, according to Madison, trying to figure out if they actually like each other without all the wedding stuff and status games. My own life continued to evolve as well. The rekindled friendships from before the divorce deepened beyond the initial awkwardness. My art classes at the elementary school expanded to include an after-school program for middle schoolers interested in more advanced techniques. I started dating again. Nothing serious. Just occasional dinners with a history professor Elaine had introduced me to. A widower with kind eyes and a genuine interest in hearing about my day. Most significantly, I began painting seriously again. For the first time since college. Not just occasional weekend projects, but dedicated evening sessions in my studio after Madison went to bed. The work was different from what I'd created in my 20s. Less technically perfect, perhaps, but more emotionally resonant, more authentically mine. I submitted pieces to the local gallery's fall showcase and was stunned when all three were accepted. The night of the gallery opening, Madison stood beside me in a dress she'd chosen specially for the occasion, beaming with pride as visitors commented on my work. "These are amazing, Mom," she whispered between conversations. "They look like exactly how you feel inside." It was perhaps the most meaningful artistic feedback I'd ever received. Toward the end of the evening, I looked up to see Michael entering the gallery. He hesitated when he spotted me, then approached with careful respect for the boundaries we'd established. "I hope it's okay that I came," he said. "Madison mentioned it was important to you, and I wanted to show support." Before I could respond, he added quickly, "I'm not staying long, just wanted to see your work." I found myself genuinely appreciative of the gesture. "Thank you for coming," I said, and meant it. He nodded, then moved to study my paintings, taking time with each one, his expression thoughtful. After a while, he returned to where Madison and I stood. "These are extraordinary, Rebecca," he said quietly. "They always were, but there's something different now, something more authentic." I was surprised by the insight, by his recognition of the evolution in my work. "Thank you," I said simply. He smiled slightly, then excused himself to speak with a mutual acquaintance across the room. "That was nice of Dad," Madison observed, "coming to support your art." I nodded, still processing the interaction. "Yes, it was." Madison watched. Her father for a moment then said, "He's really trying, I think, to be better, more honest." "I think so too," I agreed, and realized I genuinely believed it. Not because I wanted reconciliation, that door had closed firmly for both of us, but because I had seen consistent evidence of his efforts to change his patterns, to take responsibility for his choices, to engage more authentically with Madison, and even, in this small way, with me. As we drove home from the gallery that night, Madison unusually quiet beside me, I found myself reflecting on the strange journey of the past 18 months. The humiliation of being left, the confusion of having my reality rewritten, the pain of watching my daughter struggle to reconcile conflicting narratives about her family, and then the unexpected catalyst of her brave, impulsive action at the wedding, creating ripples that continued to transform all of our relationships in ways I never could have anticipated. "Mom?" Madison's voice broke into my thoughts. "I've been thinking about something." I glanced at her briefly before returning my eyes to the road. "What's that, sweetheart?" She was quiet for another moment, choosing her words carefully. "Remember how everyone was whispering about us after Dad left? Talking about poor Rebecca and making up stories about why he left?" I nodded, unsure where she was going with this. And then, after the wedding, they were all whispering again, but differently, about what Dad had said and how I exposed it. "I remember," I said. "The rumor mill in this town never stops turning." Madison shifted in her seat, turning slightly toward me. "But now it's like no one's whispering anymore. People just talk to us normally, ask about your art or my orchestra stuff. It's like we're not a scandal or a sad story anymore." I considered her observation. She was right. The awkward avoidance, the pitying glances, the carefully edited conversations, all had gradually disappeared over the past few months. We had somehow transitioned from being defined by Michael's departure to simply being ourselves again. Rebecca, the artist and teacher, Madison, the thoughtful 7th grader with a talent for viola. "I think," I said slowly, "that's what happens when you refuse to let other people define your story. When you insist on the truth, even when it's messy or uncomfortable." Madison nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "Like when I took the mic at Dad's wedding." "Exactly like that," I agreed. "You changed the narrative that day. Not just for your dad and Vanessa, but for all of us. You insisted on reality over convenient fiction." Madison looked pleased with this assessment, sitting up a bit straighter in her seat. "It wasn't just me, though," she said after a moment. "You changed things too, Mom. By not pretending to be okay when you weren't. By making art again. By not hating Dad even when he deserved it." Her insight, as always, was startling in its clarity. "Maybe we both found our voices," I suggested. "In different ways." Madison nodded, satisfied with this conclusion. "I like that. No more whispers, just our real voices." As we pulled into our driveway, the porch light welcoming us home, I felt a deep sense of peace settle over me. Not because everything was perfect. Life rarely is. But because we had navigated through the most difficult chapter of our lives with our integrity intact. We had refused to be erased, refused to accept convenient fictions, refused to let others define our worth or rewrite our history. The whispers about my failed marriage had indeed stopped. But something far more important had emerged from the silence. The clear, confident voices of two people who had discovered that truth, however messy or inconvenient, was always better than the most comforting lie. And that realization, I knew, would serve us well in whatever chapters still lay ahead. Madison bounded up the porch steps ahead of me, turning to wait as I gathered my purse and gallery program. "Mom?" she said, her expression suddenly serious in the porch light. "I'm really proud of us. For getting through all this. For being okay, even when it was really hard." I joined her on the porch, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "I'm proud of us too," I said, and realized it was perhaps the most honest thing I'd said in years. Not the practiced courage of "we're managing" or the defensive brightness of "we're fine," but the genuine recognition of how far we had come. "We did more than survive," Madison said thoughtfully, echoing my unspoken realization. "We figured out how to be real, even when everyone wanted us to pretend." She leaned against me briefly before pulling away to unlock the door. "That's better." "Then okay. That's actually kind of amazing. As we stepped into our home, the one I had once feared would feel empty without Michael's presence but now realized was filled with the authentic lives we were building, I silently agreed with my wise daughter. It was better than okay. It was genuine. It was ours. And after everything we'd been through, that felt like the most extraordinary victory of all. 6 months after the gallery opening, spring had fully arrived in Millfield. Our garden bloomed, with the bulbs Madison and I had planted together, a colorful testament to patience and growth. Life had settled into a new rhythm that no longer felt temporary or fragile, but solid in its own right. Michael and Vanessa were still seeing each other, though in a drastically different way than before. They'd abandoned the rush toward picture-perfect couplehood in favor of something more authentic, dating like normal people, getting to know each other without the pressure of maintaining a ready-made family image. According to Madison, who still enjoyed occasional outings with Vanessa, they were actually figuring out if they like the real versions of each other, not just the fancy, successful people they pretended to be. I found myself genuinely hoping it worked out for them, not out of any lingering attachment to Michael, but because I'd come to respect Vanessa's commitment to honesty and growth, and because Madison had developed a relationship with her that seemed valuable in its own right, not as a replacement mother figure, but as another adult who saw and appreciated her for exactly who she was. My own social life had expanded in ways I hadn't anticipated. The history professor, James, had become a regular presence in our lives. We'd moved beyond casual dinners to genuine friendship, and then, gradually, to something more. He was different from Michael in every way that mattered. Thoughtful where Michael had been impulsive, attentive where Michael had been self-absorbed, comfortable with emotional honesty where Michael had required carefully managed impressions. Most importantly, James genuinely enjoyed getting to know Madison, approaching their relationship with patience and respect rather than forced bonding. They'd developed their own traditions, Saturday morning chess games, debates about historical, documentaries, a shared appreciation for obscure facts that often left me playfully rolling my eyes at their enthusiasm. "He's not trying to be my dad," Madison had observed after one such morning. "He's just being himself and letting me be myself. It's nice." The simple assessment had brought tears to my eyes. My daughter, just 13, already recognizing the value of relationships built on authenticity rather than performance. My art had continued to flourish as well. After the success of the fall showcase, the local gallery had invited me to participate in a group exhibition of women artists from the region. I'd spent months preparing, creating a series that explored themes of memory, perception, and truth. Inspired, though not explicitly, by our family's journey through divorce and reinvention. The morning of the exhibition opening, I stood in my studio surveying the last piece I'd completed, a triptych that represented the same scene from 3 different perspectives, each with its own emotional truth, yet all depicting the same objective: reality. It felt like my strongest work, a visual representation of the insights I'd gained through the difficult process of having my marriage's history rewritten and then reclaimed. "Mom," Madison called from downstairs. "James is here. We should leave in 15 minutes if we want to get there early like you wanted." I smiled at her practical reminder, so like the organized child she'd always been. "Coming," I called back, taking one last look at the painting before heading downstairs. James stood in the entryway, chatting easily with Madison about some historical inaccuracy in a movie they'd watched the previous weekend. He looked up as I descended the stairs, his face lighting up in a way that still surprised me. The genuine pleasure he took in my presence, unperformed and unqualified. "The artist emerges," he said with a warm smile. "Ready for your big night?" I nodded, feeling a mixture of excitement and nerves. This exhibition was more significant than the local showcase. Critics from Indianapolis would be attending, gallery owners from neighboring cities, collectors looking for emerging artists. "You're going to be amazing," Madison assured me suddenly, looking older than her 13 years in the dress she'd chosen for the occasion. "Your paintings are the best ones they'll see all night." James chuckled at her fierce loyalty. "I concur with the art critic," he said, offering me his arm with mock formality that made both Madison and me laugh. The drive to the gallery passed. In comfortable conversation, James and Madison debating the historical accuracy of their favorite period drama, while I half listened, mind already at the gallery, mentally arranging and rearranging my paintings. When we arrived, I was surprised to see Michael's car already in the parking lot. "Dad texted to say he was coming," Madison explained, seeing my expression. "I hope that's okay. He wanted to support you." I nodded, touched by the gesture and by Madison's thoughtfulness in giving me advance warning. "Of course it's okay," I assured her. "It's nice of him to come." Inside, the gallery was bustling with pre-opening activity, staff making final adjustments, artists checking their displays, the curator talking urgently into a phone in the corner. I made my way to my designated wall, where my 5 paintings were already expertly hung, glowing under carefully positioned spotlights. "These are magnificent, Rebecca," the curator said, approaching as I adjusted the small information card beside one piece. "I've already had 2 collectors asking specifically about your work after seeing the catalog." Her words sent a thrill through me. Professional validation I'd once thought I'd never pursue again after setting aside my artistic ambitions to support Michael's career and raise Madison. As the gallery began filling with attendees, I found myself surrounded by a small crowd, some asking technical questions about my process, others sharing personal reactions to the emotional content of the work. I answered thoughtfully, no longer feeling the need to downplay my ambitions or minimize my insights as I might have during my marriage. Across the room, I spotted Michael talking with James and Madison, the 3 of them engaged in what appeared to be a genuinely pleasant conversation. The sight was surreal. My ex-husband, my daughter, and the man I was now dating interacting without tension or drama. A year ago, such a scene would have been unimaginable. Later, as the evening progressed, Michael approached me during a lull in conversations with gallery visitors. "These are remarkable, Rebecca," he said, gesturing to my paintings. "There's a depth here that's, well, it's profound. You've always been talented, but this is another level entirely." The compliment was specific, thoughtful, free from the vague praise he'd offered during our marriage when my art had been an occasional hobby he'd tolerated rather than supported. "Thank you," I said simply. "That means a lot." Michael nodded, then hesitated before adding, "I'm sorry I didn't encourage this more when we were together. I think I was threatened by it, honestly, by anything that gave you an identity separate from being my wife." The admission was startling in its self-awareness. "Therapy's been revealing some uncomfortable truths," he added with a rueful smile. "Growth is usually uncomfortable," I observed, neither absolving nor condemning him for past limitations. "But worth it, I think." He nodded, looking around at the crowded gallery, at Madison across the room animatedly explaining one of my paintings, to an elderly couple. "She's extraordinary," he said, following my gaze to our daughter. "And a lot of that is because of you. The way you raised her, the way you handled everything after I left." He met my eyes directly. "I know I've said it before, but thank you for not letting my selfishness destroy her relationship with me, even when I deserved it. There was a time when such an acknowledgement would have meant everything to me, when I had craved his recognition of what I'd sacrificed to protect Madison from the full impact of his choices. Now, it was merely a confirmation of what I already knew about myself. She deserves to form her own opinions about people, I said, including her father. Michael nodded, accepting this framing. Well, I'm trying to be worthy of the second chance she's giving me. He glanced toward James, who was now engaged in conversation with the gallery owner. He seems like a good man, he added, No hint of jealousy or territoriality in his tone. "He is," I confirmed simply. Michael smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. "I'm glad, Rebecca. You deserve someone who sees you clearly." With that, he excused himself to speak with another artist, leaving me to absorb the strange grace of this interaction. My ex-husband genuinely happy for my new beginning. Later that night, after James had gone home with promises to call the next day, Madison and I sat at our kitchen table eating ice cream straight from the carton, a celebration tradition we'd established after her first orchestra solo performance the previous year. "I sold 3 paintings," I said, still slightly dazed by the success of the evening. "The gallery owner wants to discuss a solo exhibition for next year." Madison beamed, reaching across to squeeze my hand. "That's because you're amazing and everyone finally gets to see it." I smiled at her unwavering support. It still feels surreal. For so long, art was just something I did on the side, when I had time after taking care of everything else. Madison nodded thoughtfully, scooping another spoonful of chocolate chip. "Dad was different tonight," she observed, changing the subject, with the fluid ease of adolescence. "He actually talked about your paintings like he really looked at them, not just saying generic nice things." "I noticed that too," I admitted. "He seems to be doing the work he talked about in therapy, seeing people more clearly, not just as reflections of what he wants or needs." Madison nodded again, more emphatically this time. "He's been like that with me too lately, actually listening when I talk, not just waiting for his turn or trying to solve everything." She traced patterns in the condensation on the outside of the ice cream carton. "It's weird, but in some ways, I feel like I know Dad better now than when we all lived together. Like he was playing a role before, and now he's more, I don't know, real?" Her insight struck me with its accuracy. Michael had always performed the role of successful husband and father, but the performance had been so seamless, I hadn't recognized it as such until it failed completely. "I think you're right," I said. "Sometimes people need a major disruption to see beyond the stories they tell themselves." Madison grinned suddenly. "Like a recording played at their wedding?" I laughed, appreciating her ability to find humor in what had been a dramatic moment. "Exactly like that. Not a traditional approach, but effective in its own way." Her expression turned more serious. "I'm glad you're painting again, Mom. Not just because you're good at it, but because you look different when you talk about your art, more alive." The observation was astute, capturing exactly what I felt but hadn't fully articulated. Creating art again had restored something essential in me, a connection to my core self that had been gradually submerged during my marriage. "Thank you for noticing that," I said softly. Madison shrugged, suddenly self-conscious. "I notice a lot of things," she said. "I've been practicing paying attention to what's real instead of what people pretend." It was yet another reminder of how her wedding microphone moment had shaped her, teaching her to value authenticity over comfortable pretense at an age when most children were still learning far simpler lessons. "That's a valuable skill," I told her, "one many adults never master." She smiled, pleased with the validation, then yawned widely. "I should go to bed. School tomorrow." She stood, taking our empty ice cream carton to the trash. At the kitchen doorway, she paused. "I'm proud of you, Mom, for everything." The simple declaration brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart. I'm proud of us both." Madison nodded, satisfied with this response, and headed upstairs to bed. Alone in the kitchen, I found myself reflecting on the extraordinary journey of the past 18 months. From the devastation of Michael's departure to the humiliation of being the last to know about his affair. From the confusion of having my memories questioned to the gradual reclamation of my own narrative. From being defined by whispers about my failed marriage to being celebrated for artwork that expressed my unique vision, none of it had been easy. There had been days when getting out of bed seemed like an insurmountable challenge, nights spent crying after Madison was asleep, moments when the weight of betrayal and revision threatened to crush my sense of self entirely. But we had emerged, both Madison and I, with something precious, an unshakable commitment to truth, even when it was messy or painful or inconvenient. The whispers about my failed marriage had entirely ceased, replaced by conversations about my art, Madison's music, our lives moving forward. But more importantly, the internal whispers, the ones that had questioned my worth, my perceptions, my memories, had also fallen silent. In their place was a steady certainty. My experience was valid, my history was real, my perspective mattered. I thought of Madison upstairs, this remarkable child who had insisted on truth when adults around her settled for comfortable fictions, who had taken a microphone and changed the course of all our lives with her courage, who was learning, at 13, lessons about authenticity that had taken me decades to grasp. And I thought of myself, no longer Rebecca, the abandoned wife, the cautionary tale, the object of pity. Now Rebecca, the artist, the teacher, the mother of an extraordinary daughter. Rebecca, who had refused to let others define her worth or rewrite her history. Rebecca, who had reclaimed not just her voice, but her vision, creating beauty from the wreckage of revision. The whispers had stopped, but something far more powerful had emerged from the silence. The clear, confident voices of two, people who had discovered that truth, however messy or inconvenient, was always worth fighting for. And that, I realized, was perhaps the most valuable lesson of all. The next morning, I woke to sunlight streaming through my bedroom window and the distant sound of Madison practicing viola downstairs. I lay still for a moment, savoring the peace of this ordinary moment in our rebuilt life. There would be challenges ahead, of course. Madison's teenage years, the evolution of co-parenting with Michael, the development of my relationship with James, the growth of my artistic career. But for the first time since Michael had left, I faced those future uncertainties without dread or anxiety. We had weathered the worst storm, Madison and I, and emerged with our integrity intact. Whatever came next, we would face it with the same commitment to honesty, the same refusal to accept convenient fictions, the same insistence on honoring our authentic experience. The whispers about my failed marriage had faded to silence, but our voices, clear, strong, and true, would continue to tell our story, on our terms, with all its complexity and beauty and hard-won wisdom. And in that knowledge, I found a peace I had never expected to discover on the other side of such profound disruption. I rose from bed and moved to the window, looking out at the garden Madison and I had planted together, now blooming in vibrant color. It was, I realized, the perfect metaphor for where we had arrived. Growth emerging from careful tending, beauty blooming after a season of dormancy, life reasserting itself in all its messy, glorious authenticity. The whispers had stopped, and, in their place, something far more valuable had taken root. Truth, spoken aloud at last, flourishing in the light of day. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.